I was really quite disappointed with Google. As far as I can see, they effectively have fired somebody for dissenting from the group consensus while using facts and logic to make his position. Look, I understand all the issues about diversity in Silicon Valley and all the rest of it, and there's no place in any office for cruelty, bigotry, or hatred. However, when I read the memo, look, even if you disagree with every single point he made, I felt he made his points in a logical, calm, and rational manner. I didn't think there was anything to ascribe malice or hatred to it, what I thought was an enormous amount of projection. I thought it was very unfair.
Y-Vonne, what was your reaction?
Well, I can see where Brett is coming from, but I think that this is what makes this such a tricky sort of situation. Yes, he used a calm and even tone, and yes, he supported with some research, but the crux of his argument was that women were inherently less competent to hold high-status positions, which is a biased opinion, right? And so I think when we think about why he was dismissed, I don't think he was dismissed because he was conservative-leaning or because he was anti-diversity measures. I think he was dismissed because of those biased opinions which go against Google's code of conduct.
Brett, we've been reminded the last couple days that you're allowed to have freedom of speech in, the public sphere, but when you work for a private company, you got to kind of do what they want, if that's what they say is important to them. Here's our culture. Culture is so important for companies these days. This is our culture, and you can comply or you can get out, right?
First of all, I don't think that that's what he actually said in the memo. He said, why have we dismissed absolutely the possibility that there are innate differences that may account for this? That basically we have dismissed that possibility from the thinking. I thought that was his point, and that's a very important point, regardless of where you come down in the result. In terms of freedom of speech, a lot of people say, oh, look, it's a First Amendment. It's not a First Amendment issue. This has got nothing to do with the First Amendment. It is about the fact that I do think we as Americans, as people, need to honor differences of opinion. We need to be very wary of the tyranny of the majority. We also, particularly at a company like Google, which basically controls our information flow, for these guys to start basically saying this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, is really quite dangerous.
And here's their statement, Michael, on screen about diversity, just reiterating their unequivocal about their belief that diversity and inclusion are critical. And by the way, this hits so close to home for them because they do not have a very diverse staff in the first place.
Right, exactly. No, and therefore, because that was highlighted in years past, it's been made a corporate priority. I do think, though, Y-Vonne, I wonder about your thoughts on this. You do say, of course, that this was determined to have violated Google's code of conduct, seems clearly to do that. But how do you respond to the idea, like, look, we entered the week with this already being a big firestorm, and Google management kind of disavowed it but did not dismiss the employee, and then it became a bigger issue, and perhaps even people suggested a potential legal liability down the road if they were sued on certain grounds. So how does a company finesse those things?
I mean, it's very difficult at the end of the day. I think Google did make the right call. I think you have to dismiss the employee in this situation, but you have to look at some of the underlying issues as well. To Brett's point, I think that there should be space for open discourse, for feedback on corporate programs to make sure that people feel heard. But I think where that space starts to make other people feel not valued or like their contributions will be evaluated differently, I think that's where we run into problems. And I think Google now has to take a really hard look at its diversity and inclusion programs, particularly its messaging, because to be clear, Google's diversity and inclusion initiatives don't just cover areas of gender or race, they're also targeted at vets, older workers, people from non-traditional education backgrounds, and those people can cross the ideological spectrum. So I think that there's a couple of real considerations here that go just beyond, this person expressed a conservative viewpoint and now there's a huge backlash.
Brett, by the way, it's been suggested if he had just kind of stayed on the point of this company does not allow diversity of opinion, and from sort of its reflexively liberal stance, if you want to call it that, and the fact that they're trying to promote employees to fill a quota as opposed to on their merits as harming the company, that'd be one thing. But that by then getting into the whole thing about females and whether they're qualified, that kind of took it somewhere it maybe distracted from a point that could have stood on its own and maybe wouldn't have resulted in the same kind of dismissal. Do you agree?
That's probably right. I don't know. I haven't worked at Google. I mean, it's obviously the guy has lost his job. But, at this point, you have to ask yourself, do you think people at Google who have non-conventional or dissenting views are now more likely or less likely to speak up than they were a week ago. And I think the answer is pretty obvious.
And Y-Vonne, we just mentioned there that this company has spent $265 million on diversity since 2014, and they don't have a lot to show for it.
Right. I mean, I think that this is why I say they need to revisit their practices. There are a couple of what I like to call seductive diversity solutions, right? I think, the author has a good point about reevaluating the role of unconscious bias training, which, the literature is very conflicted on. That alone does not promote an increase in diversity in the workplace, right? I think that there are better targeted initiatives that Google can engage in, right? And this is an opportunity for reevaluation.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.